Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Roundhouse Theater's panel discussion on the life of Black music, in conjunction with our production of Coleman Domingo's A Boy and His Soul, directed by Craig Wallace, starring Ro Body, now streaming on demand via our website. I am associate artist Naysan Mojgani, and I'm thrilled to be with y'all, and with our wonderful panel of experts whom I'll be introducing in just a moment. First, I want to acknowledge that our theater, where I am so grateful to currently be sitting, administrative offices, education center, and production shop are located on the unceded land of the Piscataway peoples. Roundhouse acknowledges the Piscataway as the original caretakers of this land. We pay our respects to the Piscataway community and their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. We also acknowledge that as the world experiences the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us, including everybody participating in this event today, are using the internet and other technologies that are not as readily available or accessible in present-day Indigenous communities. In our ongoing efforts to learn more and strengthen our relationships with members of our local community and to work towards dismantling the harmful effects of white supremacy and colonization, we pledge to do the work necessary to build relationships with sovereign tribal nations, to ensure that Roundhouse becomes a more inclusive space, and to never cease ongoing learning. I encourage you to check our website, roundhousetheater.org, for informational links to learn more about the Piscataway tribe, as well as how you can support organizations working to protect Indigenous rights nationally and globally. Next, I have a very exciting announcement. After enthusiastic audience and critical response, Roundhouse Theater is thrilled to announce that our virtual run of A Boy and His Soul has been extended by 2 weeks. The play is available for on-demand streaming through Sunday, May 2nd, 2021. We'll be announcing this more publicly on Monday, but y'all are the first to get this inside scoop right here, right now. Tickets for the extended dates are on sale at roundhousetheater.org, so if you haven't seen the show yet, after this discussion, you should definitely head over there and purchase those tickets. It's a beautiful production, and I think it'll soothe your soul in these difficult times. All right, that was a lot, so now the fun part. Let's introduce our panelists and get this conversation started. First is John Monds, host of the original Quiet Storm on WHUR, where that radio format was first developed over 40 years ago right here in the DMV. Welcome, John.
Say hello. Here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, our pleasure. Next, Goldie Patrick is a dramaturg, director, and playwright, as well as founding, producing, artistic director of Fresh Ink Theater Company. Hello, Goldie. Welcome.
Hey.
Next guest, Psalmayene 24, is a director, playwright, and actor who Roundhouse audiences most recently will know as one of the writers of our Homebound series from last spring. You're going to get a lot of space on the screen. Hey there, Song. How you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We're also joined by Craig Wallace, one of our resident artists, a talented actor, and, of course, the director of A Boy and His Soul. Welcome, Craig. Good to see you.
Hi. Happy to be here.
Marshall White is music teacher and director of the jazz ensemble at our neighbors right up the street from here at Bethesda-Chevy Chase High School.
Hi.
Welcome, Marshall.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be invited to join you.
Of course. And we hopefully will be joined soon by one more guest, Michael Nickens, a.k.a. Doc Nicks, who will be joining us as soon as he's able to successfully log in. He had some technical difficulties today. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to save some time at the end of our conversation for audience questions, as well as a moment to plug or share any work that you want our audience to be a part of. But for now, let's hear a little less of my voice and get this discussion going. So, in Boy and His Soul, Coleman Domingo builds his life story around the memories of the soul music that was his family's soundtrack growing up. What songs or artists would any of y'all point to as being significant and formative in your own life? A big question, but I think that y'all are a group who got lots to say about music. Anybody want to kick us off?
Well, I would say that his soundtrack, his family soundtrack, was my family soundtrack. So one of the reasons that I just leaned into this play as I read it and as we were going through the music, it's just it's just the music that I grew up with and the music that I loved. I'd also add Parliament Funkadelic to that. And, I saw Parliament Funkadelic when I was 12 years old. I saw the P-Funk Earth Tour, and it changed my life. It literally changed my life, because as a nerdy kid that liked science and music and roller skating, and I went to this circus, you know, black people in space, and you know, there was fire and the mothership and all of this stuff. I mean, it literally changed my life. I'll tell you another thing. James Brown was also a big influence in my life. My Aunt Linda would take me to concerts when I was young. I'm told that I saw James Brown at 8. I don't remember it, but it's in my family lore that I saw James Brown at 8 years old. Of course, I saw Funkadelic at 12 years old. The show, the Shining Star sequence in A Boy and His Soul, I saw that tour. Music was just so much a part of my young life. And, you know, it's interesting because back in the 70s, when I came up, you know, there was no internet. You know, there was one black radio station in my town of Rochester, New York. And even as a kid, that station didn't get full range. Like, it was on from 7 to 12, like on the weekends or something like that. So, you know, when the music would come out, like, we heard about it in the street. So, you know, when Sweet Sticky Thing came out, you know, Ohio Players, we heard about that in the street. And that's how it gained its popularity. I was thinking about this the other day that, you know, Jet Magazine told us what the top 20 records were. You know, there was no other indicator. And quite frankly, black music wasn't getting played on the pop stations. It took a lot for them to get played on the pop station. So Billboard wasn't available to us. So one of the reasons I cling to this play is that music was so much a part of our community, as well as, you know, just being just music to dance to and sing to or whatever.
All right, I'll take a stab next. That's huge to follow, but I just appreciate that so much. It's the P-Funk. That got me thinking. I am born and raised in Detroit all day, every day. It don't matter where I go in the world, I'm always repping Detroit just because I'm from Detroit. And so when I'm thinking about this and I think about like your family soundtrack, there's so many songs like across genres. If we're going on a road trip, we're listening to Kenny Rogers because you got to know when to hold them, you know. And then I didn't grow up in a religious family, but you know how black folk always got to tell you who they related to. I'm related to the Winans. I can't sing, but I'm related to the Winans. So my introduction to gospel music was listening to the Winans, and we would go to Pop's barbershop, and Pop Winans barbershop, and we would be listening to the Winans, you know, because it was only gonna be gospel music played up in there. So the influence of gospel music automatically connects me to family and a sense of kind of a larger questioning. I think one of my favorite songs growing up was The Question Is, you know, and that song alone being in my head of constantly checking back in with your creator and your source of, are you living in your purpose, is just really profound to get at like 6 and 7 years old. But today I was cleaning the house on a Saturday morning, which means I was listening to music. And I was listening to Back on the Block by Quincy Jones. And I was like, yo, this song may be the most significant song in my life. I'm a huge hip hop head, clearly. Bamboo earrings, at least 2 pair. Hip hop is my pedagogy. As a professor, I teach hip hop history and culture. As a playwright, I write in the aesthetic of hip hop theater. But Back on the Block by Quincy Jones, that album and that song in particular really lets me think about where all of the intersections of the genre of Black music began to happen for me. Because you got Ice-T starts that song rapping about selling drugs. There's no question. He's rapping about selling drugs, and then he changes that into a narrative about the music industry determining what he can talk about and him seeking liberation from that. So I'm in a car, I'm the youngest of 4, you know, and I'm with my parents and my brothers who are older than me and my sister, and a discourse starts around what everyone is saying. And the soundtrack and the music is jazz, but then there's an ode to bop in there. And it's literally a song about the consciousness and evolution of Black people. So Back on the Block and Quincy Jones is a huge part of my personal kind of love affair. I grew up playing jazz music. I grew up learning about John Coltrane via playing the trumpet and just having a teacher who was composing these masterpieces. Like we're playing A Train and I'm in the 7th grade, but it made it real. It made jazz less something that I would study and more something I would experience, ultimately to arrive to be a hip hop head, where Salt and Pepper became the most influential rappers in my life. Not because they were the most prophetic or they were the best lyricists, because they didn't even write their rhymes in the beginning, but because I saw femininity in a way that I could relate to, that represented me, and they were bold, saying things that I was scared to say. So I wasn't yet ready to be Queen Latifah. I wanted to be, but couldn't. But Salt and Pepper hit me right where I needed it to when I was in like elementary school and became my introduction to really become a hip hop head. So I would say those are kind of the little benchmarks in Black music that speak to like my family and my own evolution and upbringing.
That is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. So our final guest has been able to join us, got through his technical difficulties. So let's bring on out Dr. Michael W. Nickins, Associate Professor of Music at George Mason University, perhaps better known as Doc Nicks, leader of the Green Machine. Welcome, sir. Thanks for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm really excited about this coming together, and just from the bit that I caught there, you're just speaking my language completely, and happy to jump on in any way I can.
Beautiful. So the question is a reminder, we're just going around getting a sense of what songs, what musical artists would each of y'all point to as those that were significant, formative in your own life. And I think the question is on the table for anybody who wants to pick it up and share.
I guess I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
My background, I originally grew up in Connecticut, and as a youngster in Connecticut, there was a church down the street from our house. I used to always hear the bass line, always the bass line and the drums. And I noticed it in life as I look at the music that I cling to. It was mostly music with a heavy bass line in it. Everybody's been mentioning George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic. That became a mainstay. But prior to that, my man Larry Graham, who was with, of course, Sly and the Family Stone prior to that. Anything with bass on it, I've always been attracted to. But I also had 4 older sisters who turned me on to the Last Poets, to Gil Scott-Heron. My older sister would sometimes bring artists home. Commodores were at my house in North Carolina when I was like 10 or 11 because they were playing at Fayetteville State down the street. So I've always been around music. But the strange thing of growing up in North Carolina is that, once again, we have no R&B stations in the small town that I grew up in until I got on the radio at 14 and changed things. But I have a mixture of all kinds of music, and I realized over the years that I love James Brown, Parliament Funkadelic, and I instantly went right into Prince when he showed up during my high school years, simply because he picked up all of those elements, the rock elements that I listened to with the kids playing pinball machines growing up at places where there were only, mostly white kids playing the pinball machines where I grew up. But yeah, my musical taste is such a mixture. I do have a problem with jazz. I realized about 20 years ago, there was a song that had played in my head since I was a kid, Bumping on Sunset by Wes Montgomery. And then I realized in doing some research on it, the year that my father passed away was the year that song came out. So it stuck in my head all these years, and I would hum it, but I never knew what the song was until I actually researched it. I heard it one day and I was like, I got to find out what that song is. But yeah, my musical taste is so all over the place. It's almost amazing to me sometimes.
The bringing up being places where there weren't R&B stations or aren't soul stations. Obviously I grew up in DC, so I did not experience that. But the more I've studied, just thinking about being in places where the radio station wasn't going to bring certain records in as the main, kind of as the mainstream. This is where this tradition of intergenerational record collections come from, and how important that is across the board. Which then, of course, leads to a bunch of DJs putting parties together and figuring out that they can put the breakbeats together. And the reason why they had 2 copies of the record is because they possibly had, one themselves and one was their parents, or the friends between friends, and then before you know it, you have that whole tradition of DJing coming in. For me, around DC, obviously we got, roots going back. We celebrate Duke Ellington, which then turns into a celebration of Chuck Brown. I was thinking of really from the real beginning. My grandmother introduced me to Eloise Greenfield and her poetry, and the way that all got turned into music. Especially in that case, as my grandmother was an educator, and I'm 5 years old, she's wanting to make sure I'm hearing about kindness and hearing about love and community and taking care of family, and that's a main part of those lyrics. But at the same time, the first time I heard, LL Cool J, goodness gracious, and first time I heard Run DMC, and really began for me with Dougie Fresh and Slick Rick with The Show. That's the first tune I definitely remember hearing. My first hip hop was that tune at my cousin Chris's house, and obviously the main thing I jumped on was like, hey, that's Inspector Gadget I'm listening to. All right, but it's like the thing that was so potent then, and then led to Eric B and Rakim and EPMD and just so many others I could point to. We had artists that look like me. I like the coolest guy in the room looks like me right now. And then of course, when EU blew up, when School Days came out, and the Go-Go was going across the nation, and all that's just our neighborhood. Sugar Bear was teaching at the high school right next to my high school. And so just all of that became my social life for sure. But, studying music, I was in my dissertation before I allowed myself permission to get on stage in a concert setting and do hip hop in a formal, you know what I'm saying? And I've been wanting to be a beatboxer and a rapper since second grade, but it was very difficult to figure out how to meld that into my academic life. And it kind of, my attitude towards getting a doctorate was, I'm turning myself into a legal expert on music. And if I can have that title, then I'm including the music that I'm going to include, and y'all going to have to deal with it.
Dr. Nix, can I share something with you?
Absolutely.
So around 77 or 78, the hip hop thing in upstate New York, we were starting to get the tapes, and we were starting to hear it starting to happen. But there was a song, I can't remember how it got up to us, called Bustin' Loose. And we were like, what is this? It blew. It didn't even make the radio. I think some DJ had brought it to a roller rink or something like that. And then it started being played at house parties. And then I came down here to go to Howard in 82. And that's when I Air Raid and Trouble Funk, like it was all brand new stuff. And we were like, my mind was absolutely blown, but it was regional. It was a thing where, it took school days to get go-go, out to the masses.
Later,
right. But before then, you just had to be in the know. And it's just, oh man, I was at the Go-Go Swing at the Crystal Swing. I was there. Vinny and Sean know the party till dawn. I was there. That was like a pilgrimage. I was so excited to be introduced to Go-Go, and was amazed that everybody didn't know about it. So I just want to share that with you.
I love that. But that's the total experience. It's that's not something you get at the restaurant. That's only something your grandmother can cook for you. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
But that was all that scene led me to where I am now, and continue to keep just putting it all together, and then since I have the lane, teach it in the school, which is what I do.
Fantastic.
So I was fortunate to grow up in Brooklyn during the formative years of hip hop. So like for me, hip hop just feels like breathing, and it's who I am. But even before hip hop, my family's from Jamaica. So in my house, it was Bob Marley, it was Yellow Man, it was Gregory Isaacs. So those were sort of the sounds that I heard in my home and in the homes of my family members and things like that. And like when like Bob Marley passed, because like while he was alive, I mean, Bob Marley was known, but he's not the icon that he is now. But when he passed, like in my house, it was as if like Martin Luther King Jr., Marvin Gaye, and John Kennedy all passed at the same, like he embodied all of that. So that was like I remember that day like it was the Challenger coming down, or like 911, like that's an event that's like burned into my memory. So you have those sounds, reggae and dancehall and things like that. And then on the radio, of course, Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder, right? But then in terms of like hip hop, the first album I ever got was a friend of mine on the block had a birthday party. Charles, we call him Beanie, and Beanie's mother gave all the kids gift certificates to the record store that was on 7th Avenue. I grew up in Park Slope. So the record store was like maybe like a 20-minute walk from the crib. So I remember like a few of us, we had our gift certificates and we went to record store and I got Roxanne Roxanne by UTFO. So that was the first record that like I owned. And I mean, the excitement that I had, I came home and I played it a billion times, right? So certainly them. And then like the summer camp that I went to in my neighborhood, one of the counselors was friends with Houdini, and they came and surprised the camp and performed. And this was when Houdini was like, they were known at this point. You know what I'm saying? So it just kind of blew my mind. Like how on earth are these guys here now? So hip hop felt close to me. It felt very personal, but really was like reggae, then like the pop music of the time, which includes disco, of course, and all the R&B sort of, you know, hits of the time, and then hip hop. So all of that was sort of swirled in together.
So I'm from Baltimore, and I actually still live in Baltimore, even though I teach in Bethesda. But and I'm a product of the 70s and 80s growing up. And I kind of have a more eclectic background, being I kind of grew up with classical and jazz throughout my upbringing. But looking, and so I jotted down some names that I thought of that were very kind of influenced my music tastes. Because I'm a trumpet player, but I also play piano, still play. And yeah, I heard that you were a trumpet player in jazz band. So, you know, when I was listening to music growing up, I was always listening to groups that had these horn lines running through them, because that's always what I was listening for. And so when I looked at the show, and the first thing I saw him pull up this album, I knew right away he was pulling up Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life. I recognized that album cover because I listened to that all the time, and I listened to all the horn lines throughout that album. And pretty much every year at BCC in the jazz band, we're always doing at least one Stevie Wonder tune every year, because the music is just incredible. So you know, Stevie Wonder was certainly a huge influence on my musical taste. Another one was Al Jarreau, who was great jazz singer, and I mean the horn lines on his album was just unbelievable. He had some of the top studio guys in LA playing on his album and writing the horn lines for him. And he was actually a music teacher before he became well known as a singer. And then another one was George Benson. I remember growing up when I started to drive, started driving, and I had a cassette player in my car. I had the Breezin' album that I'd play constantly in my car. And that the opening song of that Breezin' was just like a breath of fresh air. And then when I later on, when I got to when I met my wife, she's not a musician, but she loves George Benson. And so we both early on in our marriage, we said we need to go see him. So we went. So I got a chance to see him when he came to Baltimore. The thing about him is just when he improvises, the thing that's so fascinating is that he's singing along with his improvisation. That when I first heard that, I just couldn't believe what he was doing. I mean, he's just constantly singing along with his improv as he's playing. So, and of course, in the show, they mentioned a lot about Earth, Wind, and Fire. I mean, I was hugely, crazy about that group with their horn section. Of course, James Brown had his horn section. But then I also had some other influences. Of course, Louis Armstrong as a trumpet player, and Wynton Marsalis is certainly a big hero of mine, who I've had the opportunity to meet, and he actually spoke at our graduation one year, and I have a picture with him, with Wynton. And of course, another really good jazz player was Billy Taylor, who I only got to know him because my parents used to watch the David Frost show. And I started to hear the music because he was the music director on the David Frost show. And I mean, he was just an amazing player. Of course, as a trumpet player, I was playing a lot of shows when I was in college and beyond. And I played Ain't Misbehavin' and the music of Fats Waller, which was just incredible. That show is an unbelievable show. And of course, one of my favorite movies growing up was The Sting, which had all the music of Scott Joplin. Which was also, of course, I played, some of his music, The Entertainer, of course, Maple Leaf Rag. And then I played another piece, which at the time, I went to a music camp, and I was taking both piano and trumpet at the time. And one of the teachers there introduced me to this piece called the Juba Dance. And I learned it, and I really loved that piece. And it was by this composer, R. Nathaniel Dett. And I didn't really realize who he was until probably this year or over last summer. And then I discovered a march by him. And he is a Canadian Black composer that lived in most of the 20th century, turn into the 20th century. An amazing composer. He actually was a friend of John Philip Sousa. And he wrote, and John Philip Sousa knew of him as a composer. And so there's this march that I just found last summer called Cave of the Winds, and that we're doing it with my band this year. He was a Canadian Black composer. Amazing. And he wrote a lot of piano music as well. But this Juba Dance is one of his more well-known pieces, but I had no idea who he was. And then when I started researching him, and I remembered the piece that I had played as a high school student. And it was one of my favorite pieces to play. So, of course, one other thing I'll say is another band from New Orleans that's just phenomenal is, of course, the Dirty Dozen Brass Band. Some big fan of those brass bands down there. And I occasionally, we take trips every year with our music department. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to go the last year and this year, but we have gone to New Orleans a couple of times. And the thing that I tell the kids, when you go to New Orleans, you're not going to experience anything like that anywhere else in this country. I said, you will be walking around the French Quarter. Every other corner that you turn, you're going to hear these live groups just playing. And it's just phenomenal. It's just amazing. So it's always a great trip when we go down there. It's just very long because we go
as a New Orleans native, it deeply warms my heart to hear that shout out, because, one of the things that jumped out at me from a lot of your comments is this connection between music and our memory, right? These songs that we hear when we're kids that we don't even know what they are, but that they stick with us. And growing up in New Orleans, that's so much of my childhood experience, right? That there are groups, there are songs that are just burned into my mind that years later I hear, like, oh, that's who that is. And it is, as you say, it is a unique place. But that phenomenon of that, just the atmosphere of music is, I think, clearly is not unique to New Orleans, which is lovely. I love hearing these connections between these songs, these artists, and us as individual human beings, which makes me wonder, if we broaden that perspective from the individual to the larger society, is there a similar relationship between that music and Black communities, not just Black individuals, but actual communities? I think a couple of y'all touched on this, but how that music helps build who we are as a group of people as well is something that's, I think, curious to think about.
I'm fascinated by the fact that, and I think I wrote this in the program notes, that especially during the 70s, so much of our music was positive. Not all of it, of course, but we were grooving. We were in the, we were, Shining Star. We were dancing, the bus stop. We were, and that in the midst of trying to survive, we had the music, which I think so much of what A Boy and His Soul is about. One of the things that strikes me about the piece is that, because it's Coleman's story, and, he was, when he wrote it, he was a struggling actor trying to figure out his way, dealing with, the loss of his parents and all of that stuff. So the idea of going back to those moments, to that music, was really feeding him. And it's so interesting to me that in the Black community, especially since another great thing about the play is that the music is shared. So, we see his uncle, and we see his aunt, we see his mother, and we see him watching his mother dream for something better. We see the uncle, getting on down with his nasty self, and as kids, we absorb that. And that was part of love, even though outside of the home, money was tight. Equality wasn't there, and yet we still found a way to, it was a foundation for many of us, not all of us, but for many of us. It's interesting. There's I believe this is true, but when Curtis Mayfield wrote the soundtrack to Superfly, he said he didn't want to write about drugs. He wanted to write against drugs. And if you notice, every song on that album is an anti-drug song. And to me, that's sort of indicative of how we were living, like the music somehow. We shared the music as families, as communities. I talked about this before. You found out that the jam was the jam because your cousin had it, or you went to somebody's house and they had it. The radio station, the internet. Nobody was telling us. We all had to find out from each other, and it perpetuated, I think, and it solidified us. And I'm speaking as just a child of the 70s, and that's sort of how I remember music moving me. But I feel that I just find it fascinating that so much of it, because when I went to graduate school and my musical taste started to expand, I would listen to people talk about the great rock artists, Springsteen, and Dylan, and it dawned on me that their lyrical content is amazing, but sometimes their musical content is simple. But Black music, our lyrical content is let's get on down, but the arrangements are off the hook. There's something about rhythm and groove. That's where, we lived in that as a kind of comfort. Yeah, I'm talking too much. Sorry. I'm passionate about this stuff.
But not at all. It's so poignant. Like the socializing is in the dance and the movement, and that is the movement is the small talk, and beyond. You can really build a relationship in just how we move in a room together, or how we move across a football field together, or down a street, in a stomp parade, or however it is in the pews in the church, however it is. And so it's like maybe putting too many words in might distract from the electric connection that's happening. However, we can take it in the other direction too. I've often heard the Wu-Tang Clan lauded as the densest lyrical content of any music ever made. You'll do yourself a favor and widen your vocabulary. You know what I'm saying? For better or for worse. But you know, there's just a lot there, and you know, as you were talking about Springsteen, and I loved all that stuff. I loved all those rock tunes and all the stuff that was all over MTV and you know the big rock concerts and all that selling out. And then it was just kind of interesting how sometimes if I were going to bring up in certain circles, if I was going to try and bring up a Black artist in the conversation about best band ever or greatest singer or songwriter or something, I always felt like I had to fight. I had to fight to get Stevie Wonder in there for some reason. I had to fight to get Prince in there. And most of the time, the people listening to me wouldn't even realize whoever artist they're holding up, Prince wrote 9/10 of their songs for them. It's like, you know, but it's just an interesting thing about just that kind of perception and you know what people take away from it. But you get below that into what it actually is, and the reality is beyond your wildest dreams.
And there's no real, I mean, I feel like as a Black man, I get to hear everything, but I'm not sure that white people get to hear everything.
Yeah. I actually was about to say that I think part of the politics of the way Black music socializes Black people is through an enveloped code. It ain't for everybody. And so even if we are appearing to be dancing, we're really listening, or we're getting the vibration of resistance inside of that. And so you think we just dance into it. You think we just bobbing our head to it, but we're absorbing so much more. And I think that traces back to the history of what music means for people of African descent in particular, right? So when you think about how sacred the drum is, when you think about the talking of the drum. I mean, when you bring up New Orleans, the first thing I was like, oh, I want to go to Congo Square right now, because there's a message in that, you know. And as someone who was exposed to so many different kinds of music, and then landed very firmly in rap music and hip hop culture, I realized how much I learned about music in my current love. Like, you know, I'll listen to a song for years and then suddenly hear the sample. And in hearing the sample, I go, wait a minute, let me go back and listen. I know the original song. And I go back and I listen to the original song and I go, oh my God, great example. Talib Kweli, right? Love Talib Kweli. Been listening to him forever. I go back and I'm like, Get By. And I'm like, I think it's Get By. And I'm like, let me go listen again. Sinner Man. Oh my God, Sinner Man. Oh my God. Not just the sample, but why the sample? So now I have a musical library where Talib lives. And because of the way playlists work now, I got the next song coming up, Nina Simone. And then I'm like, what else did I miss in Nina's library? So I'm reconnecting constantly. And in the reconnecting, I feel like I'm revisiting messages and stories and experiences that my grown woman self experiences very differently than when I was 7 and heard it. When I was 7 and heard it, I moved with the rhythm maybe. But now as a woman, I'm like, oh, this is the political message. You know, Strange Fruit has a totally different resonance to me today, but you know, than it did 5 years ago, than it did 7 years ago. Not that I didn't know the history, but just as I experience life in this world, I'm reconnecting with kind of the history of the music differently.
I've always had the concept that music is history. You can play a song and it could take you back to a time in history, what was going on in your life. I had a conversation with Anita Baker about 20 years ago about how Black artists in this country, by us, are somewhat disrespected because we forget them after they don't have a record out. So all of a sudden, an artist hasn't recorded a song in 10 years, but the music they created is forgotten because they're not hot anymore. We always want the hottest thing at all times. And it seems like we have in the past forgotten. Some of these versus battles seem to be bringing back the music for the young folks. But there was a time when if an artist didn't have a hot record out, they were forgotten. And like I said, 20 years ago, Anita Baker and I had that conversation. We spoke about 5 years ago, and she was like, you know what? It was so true what you said. She didn't realize it at the time. But I noticed that when I travel in Europe and I see the love for Black artists in Europe, but those same artists can't even sell out a coffee shop here, but over there they'll sell out a venue with 1,500, 2,000 people. So do we forget what's already been there? Why can't we hang on to it?
Which is one of the interesting things about, with Goldie, you mentioning sampling, that is one of those ways that we rediscover or are reminded of those artists who they themselves might not have put something out recently. But it's one of the beautiful things about hip hop and remix culture is that other artists reminding us of what has come before, which is beautiful. While I have the floor, just a quick note, we'll be opening up some audience questions soon. So those watching, feel free to drop any questions you might have for the panelists in the chat box on your screen. We'd love to get some questions. Marshall, I think you were about to chime in. Go for it, sir.
Yeah, I was just going to say, reflecting on what Goldie said about, feeling the music and communicating, I was going to add that, many of the spirituals that were written, they did have a code in the music. And a couple years ago, I did an arrangement. I did two arrangements of a collection of piano pieces by Samuel Coleridge Taylor, this British African composer. And I did Deep River with the students. And I explained to them, when we learned it, I tried to explain there's a lot of things in this music that you have to understand the struggles that the people went through in this music. And that I think it was first performed by Marian Anderson. And there's so much tension and soul in the music that I tried to get across to the students. And that's with a lot of the spirituals that are out there. And the other thing I was going to say was as a freelance trumpet player, I've had the opportunity to, for several years, at Christmas time, I would play in Baltimore at this church. They did a gospel Messiah arrangements, but they would hire an orchestra to play. And the choir, whenever I've gone and played with a gospel choir, I'm just absolutely blown away by I just don't know how to describe it. They just have something. There's so much, I guess the only word I can say is soul and feeling when they're singing that you just cannot help but get into the music. And it's just amazing that to have that experience every time that I've played with a gospel choir. It's unreal. And I'm very good friends. I don't know. I've played many times with Howard University's choir. I play at those, they have a graduation, or they do a performance in, I forget what they call it, but in the beginning of the semester they do, and the choir always sings, and we accompany them. But they're phenomenal. But I'm also good friends with the Morgan State University choir director, who I actually went to high school with, this Eric Conway. And I played with him a lot. But again, their choir is just phenomenal. And whenever I hear these types of music, you just sit back and it's just amazing. And it's a different experience than listening. I'm not saying taking anything away from listening to, singing Bach or Handel, the Messiah, which is also great music. But there's just something about the gospel choir that just grabs you and just pulls you in.
Yeah, I'll quickly add that, because Marley was the first artist that I really listened to and paid attention to, that sort of approach of using art to somehow push forward the liberation of Black people was just embedded in my mind. So for me, that was the function of music, because that's what I heard Bob Marley do. So it's like the music had to sound dope, it had to make you move, and then it had to have some sort of revolutionary impulse behind it. And then coming from like the earlier days of hip hop when that was more obvious. That's still the case now with hip hop, but you might just need to sort of look for it a little bit more, but it's still encoded in the DNA of hip hop. It's the function of the music is to get us free. That's what it's about. And part of that is through dancing. Just the act of dancing is liberation, and sort of connecting music. Like, I mean, you can't disconnect it from movement. You can't disconnect the music from the vocals. And that very much is about sort of that African impulse that Goldie talked about, where it's a holistic sort of culture. It's not a compartmentalized thing where you just have the music, but it's like you have music, you have to have dancing, and you have to have some kind of talking. If it's a griot who's talking over a talking drum, or a rapper or a singer, I mean, it's, you know, it's all part of the same sort of line and connection. So yeah, it's like, it's for me, it's that impulse to you know, overcome oppression is underneath all the music that I love. That's the sort of the driving force and fuel in it.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Doc Nix.
I was gonna say we had the experience early on, after hearing Fat Boys, after hearing Dougie Fresh, after hearing Ready Rock C, and we figured out real quick that in the boys' bathroom there's a real nice reverb, and if we practice our beatboxing in there, you know, and then somebody would rhyme over top of it, or maybe we would just have fun making beats or whatever. But even that thing where we would have to escape from PE a little bit, or the lunchroom a little bit, so we could go in there and do that. You know, it's like that was you know, that's for fun back in there. But I'm looking back at it now, thinking about all the times when I'm in a space where if the vibe isn't right in the room, it feels like an act of resistance just to stand there, just to even just be in the room. And so then, you know, nothing was as affirming as watching Miles Morales swinging around Brooklyn as Spider-Man, and you know, and hearing Biggie and seeing Air Jordans, and oh my goodness, what that did for reminding me of my second grade self, trying to be like Ready Rock C, trying to be like the Fat Boys. That thing where, you know, we're many times we can talk about the big stars and how that creates community, but also the self-made music, the music that we made ourselves, the beatboxing, the hitting desks, picking a bucket up. And then when we got to the band room, you know, we're supposed to play Sousa, but in the breaks, we got cockadoo, you know, getting in trouble a little bit for it. But, you know, and it's just how important it is later in life for to make spaces so that you're not in trouble for playing go-go on the toms that were made for it. You know what I'm saying? How could it be anything else anyway? The making it ourselves thing is really important to me.
I love that. I want to highlight there, you know, in what really jumped out at me from what you're saying is this sense of transgression, and how, you know, just thinking about the history of African Americans in this country, right? That there is something inherent to just existing, and particularly something inherent to any expression of ourselves, any expression of our joy is always going to be inherently transgressive. And so, like, obviously that is built into the DNA of our music. I love that. A couple questions in the chat, and there's one that I particularly like here from Charisse. Is there something in the call and response tradition in Black music that is inherently inclusive, that creates community? Right, so that call and response that is in so much of our music, is that what, maybe, you know, is that what, Marshall, you were gesturing at with the bringing you in when you're listening to these gospel singers? You're talking about that call and response.
Yeah, if I can, I'll jump on answering that, because yes, and yes, what up though? Like, it is our very existence and survival is resistance. Like, hello, when I am in the room, and when I am in the room unapologetic in my culture, whatever that culture is, whether it's specific to blues, jazz, soul, hip hop, reggae, You know what I'm saying? Soca. When I'm in the room and unapologetic, it should set people who are content to sustain a full white supremacy status quo. It sets them unease. Good. We clapping on 2 and 4. That, come on now, you gonna get with it or you not. And so I think the call and response affirms the presence of that culture to the audience. You know, it says, I recognize that y'all are not invincible. Y'all are here. And so to affirm that you're here, I'm going to shout y'all out. You know, if I were to say God is good, those who know would say all the time. If I say, you know, hey, yo, those who know will say, right? And so what it does is, I think in some spaces, it disrupts the quo that's set on white supremacy. In other spaces, more importantly, it affirms all that is, you know, all of the intricacies of Black culture. As a playwright, when I write my plays, I write it in Black vernacular. I write it every play has a note of what song this is. If you're trying to figure out what this is, Donny Hathaway and Roberta Flack, Be Real Black for me. So when you read it as a reader, you're like, context, okay. And if you don't read it, then culturally, you know, this was not written necessarily for you. So you will have to do the dramaturgical and cultural work to understand. And I think that's a shift that's valuable. You know, that's why this show is so dope, because you don't need a whole bunch of notes. You're going to watch it, you're going to feel it, and you're going to see yourself. And that is so powerful and affirming.
In the go-go, I'm thinking about, you know, the fun it is to shout out your neighborhood. What's your area code? 703. What's your area code? 202. You know what I'm saying? But then let's look at it another way. That's a reclaiming after dealing with a century of redlining, you know? And it's like, you might feel under some circumstances that it's not such a great thing to be from X, Y, or Z. But in this case, as you're surviving it, as you're reclaiming it, particularly reclaiming it, then we're going to make the party music about that. And the pride of saying, I did come across from Alexandria for this show. I am 703. I'm proud to be it, you know. Proud that my grandfather had his, you know, medical practice on Cameron Street since the 50s or whenever, you know, like even before that, probably. I got to ask my mother when he got that place. And so yeah, I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of my Howard University connections as well. So I'm proud of my Bay Highlands, you know, Black Walnut Creek connections too, down there in Annapolis. You know, I'm about to go get some crabs tomorrow now that I'm talking about it. but taking that song and reclaiming it with a party, because of that, just all the things that came from before, and we're still able to make cuisine out of table scraps, even with that.
There's just another question from JD. I wonder if anyone wants to speak to in the last few minutes here. Please speak to the importance of Black music when dealing with mental health challenges. Fascinating to think about.
Don't push me because I'm close to the edge. That right off the bat, that's a acknowledgement that we're all walking around, holding on to something, pushing against something, just doing the best we can to make it these next steps. And so we can come to the songs with the bravado, we can come to the songs with the escapism, but on that one, it's like, I need to talk about my emotional state right now and all the things that are pushing on me right now. And, you know, I could also think of it in a different sense of like being somehow separated from our own culture, where it's like it only exists in the commercial realm. It's not the people who are the people who are listening and singing along in their cars or in their houses or at the parties or whatever. And then I think of Mos Def with his We Are Hip Hop, and that whole line talking about hip hop's not this thing up in the hills, but it's us. And if hip hop's doing well, if we're doing well, hip hop's doing well. And if we're smoked out, hip hop's smoked out. And then all just remembering how important it is for us to take self-care and take care of each other. But then back to that thing with the message, it's like that acknowledgement that we don't need to be at 100% at all times, and the strength that we find at those low moments, at those challenge moments, and in that case of that song, being able to say it out loud in words, and then acknowledge the shared experience with that. That's the first thing that jumps to my mind, and remembering how much we need to be able to share with each other our struggles and our solutions, or even just that we're next to each other in it and we don't know what to do about it, but we're okay to some extent just because we're together. I think all of that is wrapped up in it.
And absolutely. And I'd like to say that this, this is actually all music, but since we're talking about Black music, find yourself some Stevie Wonder, find yourself some Luther Vandross, find yourself a groove, listen, breathe, listen to that rhythm, the bass that John was talking about. All of that stuff will that this music allows you to breathe and find some peace. And like I said, if it's not Black music, whatever kind of music soothes, music comforts, and that can go a long way in trying to find your ground, trying to find a way to get to from A to B to C to D.
Yeah, I also think about the commodification of Black art and Black genius that's built on pain, that's built on suffering. Like, I love Donny Hathaway, and it breaks my heart when I listen to it, because it's not an outside story, it's the inside grief. I love Miles Davis, and as a Black woman, I struggled for years, and probably this year, when I read Cicely Tyson's interviews, that I was able to come to peace with listening to Miles Davis, knowing all that pain and strife that was in his music. I love Nina Simone, but I can't ignore what she was dealing with in creating the music. I love DMX. He is Dark Man X. And so when we talk about mental health and we talk about this ability to so honestly talk from our darkest places as much as our joy, I do wonder, how do we as consumers and how do we as community gather to support when we hear it? Like, when we get a chance to breathe because they have poured their suffering out in the music, what does the next step look like in terms of saying, yo, this was great, but Donnie does have a problem. He is schizophrenic. We can't just play the song and that be enough. So that's a great question, JD.
I think that brings us to our time. That was a wonderful note to end on, I think. Thank you all so much. Before we go, I want to make sure for our panelists, if there's anything that our folks watching at home, any projects you've got coming up, anything you need to plug, anything they should be aware of. I think a couple of y'all had some stuff you wanted to share. Some?
Yeah. I'll share. So at Ford's Theater, a piece called Necessary Sacrifices. This is an audio play, actually co-starring Craig Wallace as Frederick Douglass. It's a two-person piece about Lincoln and Douglass, and that goes live April 15th, I believe. So that's through Ford's Theater.
Directed by Psalm.
Yeah, and I yes. Yes.
Then Goldie, was there something you wanted to share, I think?
Yes, sure. So I'm a poet and a playwright, and on April 17th, I will be doing an Instagram stream live of performance in celebration of National Poetry Month. You can follow my handle. You can go to the website to find it. And then a re-airing of my performance of Small Water Woman at the Kennedy Center will also air on April 20th. So kind of staying in the poetry lane for April.
Cool.
Okay. It looks like Marshall, you also had something you wanted to promote. Please go for it.
Yeah, I was just to say our music groups are unfortunately, we're not able to do a public concert this year, but we are currently working on virtual performances, and my groups, all three of my groups will be putting out their virtual concert through our BCC Music YouTube channel. And all three of my groups are actually performing a piece by a Black composer. The band is doing this Cave of the Winds by Nathaniel Dett. The jazz band is doing Superstition by Stevie Wonder. And The orchestra is playing a piece by Samuel Coleridge Taylor, Caprice de Nanette. It's the first movement of 4 dances that Samuel Coleridge Taylor wrote for orchestra.
Fantastic. Dr. Nick, so you unmute something you wanted to share with us?
I want to jump on that. I'm on the Frederick Douglass train myself. For the George Mason University Wind Symphony, I am in the middle of composing and recording a new piece. My great-great-grandfather, James Monroe Gregory, who was the first valedictorian of Howard University and then later a professor, wrote a biography of Frederick Douglass. And as Mason was asking me for a piece with narrator, I decided to take excerpts from the book, words about Douglass and words of Douglass's words, put that together. And so you get hearing some descriptive about him and you get to hear the speeches. And I'm writing a musical score to go under it on first week of May. We're going to be premiering the I'm sorry, I think it's May 8th, but I'm not 100% sure. We're going to be premiering the second movement of the piece. The whole work is entitled Frederick Douglass, the Orator, the Abolitionist, the Man. And it's a 5-movement work. And as it has been commissioned by the Commonwealth of Virginia, I've decided to deliver them a 5-movement work, but only ever write 3 of the movements so that they will get 3/5 of a piece. And so then we will hear speeches from the man. We're going to hear about him as a Washingtonian, and we're going to the fourth movement, final movement. It will be I have the pieces from his memorial service and eulogies, and it will be people eulogizing him and music that was in the service. So second movement will be premiering next month. The rest of it will be coming after the summer. Absolutely beautiful. And John, of course, viewers can listen to you. You leave Monday through Friday every night, yeah?
7:30 till midnight on WHUR. And I want to mention the play again. A friend of mine lost his mom. He lost his dad 3 years ago, but he lost his mom 3 nights ago. And I watched the play, and they always say art imitates life. He's actually going through it now because he's going through his parents' stuff and the records and everything. So if you get a chance, if you haven't seen the play yet, definitely do check it out.
Thank you so much. On that note, also, yes, as I said at the beginning, the show has been extended. Tickets are available on roundhousetheater.org. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you to all of our panelists. Y'all were great. Really appreciate it. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.